They told my mother she couldn't breathe mountain air on land that had belonged to her father, land that was now mine, simply because a fated county road passed tangentially by their precious, prefabricated utopia. Karen Henderson, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, a woman whose face seemed permanently molded into an expression of affronted authority, stood at the turnoff, arms crossed, a fluorescent vest her only claim to legitimacy. My mother, frail but resolute, clutched a small worn photograph of my father, taken on the porch of the ranch house decades ago. The ranch, mind you, was a full 5 miles from the nearest Whispering Pines mailbox, separated by a state forest and a healthy dose of common sense, neither of which Karen possessed. "This access is for HOA members and their approved guests only," she declared, her voice a rasp of petty dominion. "Your gathering constitutes an unpermitted assembly." My sister tried to reason, explaining the ranch wasn't, nor had it ever been, affiliated with their little fiefdom. Karen just smirked. "All land accessed via this corridor falls under our purview for traffic and environmental impact." That was their first mistake, the outright fabrication. Their second was assuming I was just another weekend rancher they could intimidate with their bogus bylaws. They didn't know my weekdays were spent dissecting federal statutes, dismantling arguments crafted by far more cunning minds than Karen Henderson's. They didn't know they hadn't just inconvenienced a family. They declared war on a federal lawyer who considered that ranch sacred ground. They drew the line. I was about to erase it, and them along with it. The look on my mother's face, a quiet devastation that crumpled her already fragile composure, was a brand seared into my resolve. This wasn't about a blocked road anymore. This was about dignity, about memory, about the fundamental right to one's own damn property without harassment, from a committee of self-important busybodies drunk on the thimbleful of power their little covenant kingdom afforded them. Back in the city, my office, usually a sanctuary of ordered logic and complex case files, transformed into a command center. The initial fury, hot and raw, cooled into something far more dangerous, a cold, meticulous blueprint for retaliation. They had weaponized their perceived authority. I would unsheathe the genuine article. My family was my bedrock. The ranch, a legacy. Karen Henderson and her Whispering Pines acolytes had trespassed upon something far more significant than a dirt track. They had violated a sanctuary, and in doing so, had made themselves a target. I pulled the plat maps first, ancient, linen-backed documents from the county assessor's office. Then the deeds, the easements, the original land grants. The history of that valley unspooled before me, clear and irrefutable. The access road was a county-maintained public thoroughfare, established in 1947. Whispering Pines, HOA, LLC, was incorporated in 1998. Their claim was not just baseless, it was an act of breathtaking, legally actionable arrogance. They had mistaken my quiet demeanor for weakness. They would soon learn it was the calm before a meticulously orchestrated storm of legal obliteration. My first call was to Elias Thorne, a grizzled county surveyor I'd once helped out of a bureaucratic jam involving federal wetland delineations. His knowledge of local land quirks was encyclopedic. "Whispering Pines?" he'd chuckled, a dry, crackling sound. "Oh, they're a special brand of stupid, son. Think their 5-page charter gives them dominion over God's green earth." He confirmed the road's status and, more importantly, hinted at a pattern. They try this stunt every few years when a new president gets a bee in their bonnet, usually back down when someone shows them a real map. But this time, backing down wouldn't be enough. I wasn't just going to reopen a road. I was going to dismantle their capacity to ever cause such harm again. My associate, a tech-savvy young woman named Lena, began a digital deep dive. She surfaced with a treasure trove: OA meeting minutes riddled with overreach, a forum filled with complaints from actual Whispering Pines residents about Henderson's tyrannical reign, illegal fines, arbitrary rule changes, harassment. It became clear Henderson wasn't just an annoyance. She was running a racket, using the HOA as a personal power base, likely enriching herself or her cronies through opaque vendor contracts and punitive enforcement actions. The ranch incident was merely a symptom of a deeper institutional rot. My strategy began to crystallize. First, a precise legal scalpel to excise the immediate obstruction, then a sledgehammer to the foundations of their illicit authority. The cease and desist letter I drafted was not a request. It was a declaration of terms. 2 pages of densely packed legal precedent, citing specific county ordinances and state statutes they were violating. From interference with public right-of-way to potential claims under RICO statutes if their financial misdeeds, which Lena was now diligently tracing, proved substantial. It was delivered by a process server whose stoic demeanor seemed to unnerve even Karen Henderson when he handed it to her during one of her self-aggrandizing poolside community updates. Her response, as anticipated, was a masterpiece of ignorant belligerence. A rambling, misspelled letter, faxed, to my office, accusing me of harassment and threatening to place a lien on my ranch for unauthorized attempts to circumvent HOA authority. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity was almost beautiful in its purity. She cited bylaws that clearly only pertained to lots within the Whispering Pines subdivision, attached a poorly photocopied map where someone had crudely drawn a red line encompassing my property, and signed it with a flourish that suggested she believed herself to be signing a treaty between sovereign nations. This document, I thought with a grim smile, was not a defense. It was Exhibit A in their self-immolation. I scanned it, saved it as Henderson Confession, PDF, and forwarded it to Lena with a single word: gold. The battle lines were drawn not on a dusty road, but across the vast expanse of their own hubris. The stories started to trickle in, then flood. Old Man Hemlock, whose property bordered the actual HOA, told me how they'd tried to fine him for the color of his barn, visible only with binoculars from their furthest cul-de-sac. A young couple, new to the area and actual residents of Whispering Pines, detailed how Henderson had personally vetoed their choice of drought-resistant native plants because they didn't fit her aesthetic vision, which apparently involved water-guzzling flora unsuited to the high desert. Lena uncovered records of the HOA contracting landscaping and security services to companies owned by Henderson's brother-in-law at rates nearly double the local average. This wasn't just overreach. It was a pattern of abuse, potential fraud, and systematic intimidation. My personal grievance was now a public imperative. I began compiling affidavits, each one a nail in the coffin I was building for Whispering Pines HOA. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore, or my mother's access to it. It was about drawing a line against petty tyrants everywhere who believed a cheaply printed badge and a sense of entitlement gave them power they hadn't earned and didn't deserve. The fight had expanded. I was no longer just defending my land. I was liberating a county from a localized infection of delusion. The scope of my planned retaliation broadened from a targeted strike to a full-scale eradication. My next meeting was with the county commissioners and Sarah Jennings, the pragmatic, overworked county council. I didn't go in hot. I went in cold, armed with a meticulously organized binder thicker than a phone book for a small city. I laid out the case, section by section. The public status of the access road, backed by deeds and county surveys dating back 70 years, Henderson's fraudulent claims of authority, evidenced by her own ludicrous letter, the sworn affidavits from other harassed landowners and even current HOA members, Lena's preliminary financial forensics suggesting a pattern of self-dealing. I pointed out the county's potential liability for allowing a rogue entity to misrepresent its authority, effectively commandeering public infrastructure and extorting citizens. Jennings, initially skeptical, grew visibly alarmed as the evidence mounted. The commissioners, a trio of weathered ranchers and small-town business owners who valued property rights above almost all else, listened with deepening frowns. This Henderson woman, one of them finally rumbled, a man named McCoy who owned half the cattle in the northern part of the county. Sounds like she's built herself a little toll booth on a public road and is charging folks to breathe. I simply nodded. Metaphorically, yes. And her HOA's articles of incorporation, filed with this county, clearly limit their jurisdiction to the platted lots of the Whispering Pines development. Their actions constitute consistent and flagrant ultra-vires activity. The air in the room shifted. It was no longer me against the HOA. It was the rule of law against anarchy. We orchestrated the stage for Karen Henderson's public downfall with the precision of a military campaign. The next county commissioners' meeting was the chosen venue. An agenda item was discreetly added: review of HOA jurisdictional compliance and conduct case study. Whispering Pines HOA. Lena ensured a few strategically placed calls to the local paper and a popular regional blog, hinting at a major local governance scandal. The meeting room, usually sparsely attended, was packed. Whispering Pines residents, both aggrieved and merely curious, were there. So were other county landowners, alerted by the low rumble of impending justice. Karen Henderson arrived late, flanked by two sour-faced board members, radiating an air of indignant importance. She clearly expected to browbeat the commissioners, as she did her unfortunate residents. I sat quietly in the front row, my binder on my lap. When her item was called, she strode to the podium, launched into a rambling diatribe about maintaining community standards and uncooperative elements, threatening their way of life. She even had the audacity to point at me and call me an every outside agitator. The performance was pure hubris, a magnificent testament to her detachment from reality. It was everything I had hoped for. She was not just digging her own grave, she was doing it with a silver-plated shovel, live on local access television. When Henderson paused for breath, Chairman McCoy gestured to me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice like gravel, "you have a response?" I walked to the podium, not with a speech, but with facts. I had a projector, and the first image was the 1947 county survey map, the public access road clearly marked. Click. Next, the Whispering Pines HOA plat map, showing its legal boundaries miles away from my ranch. Click. Henderson's threatening letter, its absurd claims highlighted. Click. Affidavits. Click. Financial irregularities. Click. With each slide, I delivered a calm, surgically precise sentence dismantling her narrative. "Mrs. Henderson, your HOA's authority ends here," I stated, my laser pointer tracing the actual boundary. "This road is public. Your claims are fraudulent. Your actions constitute harassment and potentially criminal conspiracy." I turned to the commissioners. This isn't just about one ranch. This HOA has operated as a rogue entity, exceeding its charter, intimidating residents, and misappropriating funds. They are a liability to this county. Karen's face, a moment before flushed with righteous fury, was now a mask of dawning horror. The color drained from it as County Counsel Jennings rose and stated, "Based on the evidence presented and our own review, it is the County Council's opinion that Whispering Pines HOA has repeatedly acted outside its legal authority, in direct violation of its Articles of Incorporation and numerous county ordinances." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a choked gasp from one of Henderson's companions. The final act was swift and brutal, delivered with the dispassionate force of established law. Following Jennings' recommendation, the county commissioners voted unanimously on a series of resolutions. First, an immediate injunction, legally drafted by Jennings on the spot and signed by a duty judge who had been quietly observing from the back, prohibiting Whispering Pines HOA, its officers, or agents from asserting any authority, collecting any fees, or erecting any barriers or signage outside the strict platted boundaries of their development. Violation would result in contempt charges and substantial personal fines for the officers involved. Second, they initiated a full audit of the HOA's finances by the county auditor. Third, and this was the masterpiece of legally sanctioned destruction I had worked towards, they passed a motion to review Whispering Pines HOA's very right to exist as a chartered entity within the county. Given its pattern of gross misconduct and ultra-vires actions, this effectively put them on notice of dissolution. Karen Henderson looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her attempt to speak was cut off by McCoy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice devoid of sympathy, "you were given a little authority over your own patch. You tried to make it an empire. This county doesn't tolerate petty dictators." She was publicly stripped, not just of her imaginary power, but of her actual limited authority. The message was clear. Their reign of error was over. They weren't just banned from my ranch. Their ability to function as a credible or even existing entity in the county was now hanging by a thread I had meticulously frayed. A week later, my mother, my sister, and her children drove up to the ranch. The turnoff was clear. No fluorescent vest, no officious pronouncements. Just the quiet dignity of the old county road leading to the land my grandfather had homesteaded. We sat on the porch, the same porch from my father's photograph, and watched the sunset paint the peaks crimson. The air was clean, untainted by the stench of petty tyranny. The Whispering Pines HOA, I later heard, imploded. The audit revealed years of mismanagement and Henderson's quiet siphoning of funds. Facing potential criminal charges and personal bankruptcy from fines, she resigned and reportedly sold her house at a loss, disappearing from the county altogether. The HOA itself, leaderless and disgraced, eventually dissolved under county pressure, its covenants becoming a footnote in property deeds rather than a bludgeon. I never set out to destroy them, not entirely. I set out to protect my family and my property. But when confronted with such blatant, arrogant abuse of power, the only proportionate response was its complete and utter dismantling. Sometimes, the law isn't just a shield, it's a sword. And some people, it seems, only understand its language when it's pressed firmly against their throats. The gate to my ranch now stands as it always should have, a welcome to family, a boundary to the world, and a silent testament to the fact that even the smallest empires built on delusion will inevitably crumble before the unwavering application of truth and a well-drafted legal brief.